Hello and good afternoon from the brutal capitalist dictatorship of Londonia. Hope you're having an amazing day, because if you're having an amazing day, I'm having an amazing day. If I'm having an amazing day, you should also be having an amazing day. Okay, I know today's supposed to be my vacation day, but my schedule never sleeps. And so I have a banger of a video coming up right for you. But before that, please do me a favor. Do click subscribe to my channel. It really helps. Without further ado, let's begin. And don't get me wrong, while I do like London a lot, and there are many good things about London, like it's a very civilized place. As compared to KL, everybody says please and thank you. There is at least a veneer of civility on everyone's face. And it's a very well-organized and much cleaner place than KL. I don't see myself moving here in the long run. Now, even if you gave me an opportunity to move to the UK, even though I like it very much because I feel I'm in my element here, I don't feel like a fish out of water, I still see Malaysia as home. And in the end, I will not move. It's true, as the Malaysian liberals say, Malaysia might be a shithole when you compare it to a developed Western country like the UK. But at the end of the day, Malaysia is my shithole, and it is my favorite toilet throne. So I'm not going anywhere. Now, a couple of months ago, I made this video on Malaysian doomerism. And basically the gist of it is that in this video, I talked about how many Malaysians who have studied in a global north country, like a European country, or Australia, or Canada, or the United States, feel a certain sense of doomerism when it concerns Malaysia. They feel that, as compared to any global north country, they feel that Malaysia is basically a shithole, and there's no salvation for Malaysia. And fundamentally, these people feel that Malaysia is a sinking ship, and they feel that the only way out is basically to leave, never return. But as I continue to reiterate, this mentality is fundamentally a bourgeois, white-collar Malaysian mentality. Because the paradox of all of this, just like in America, you'll notice that the most patriotic people in Malaysia tend to be the poorest people as well. Whereas people who've had the opportunity to live in global north countries, like in Europe, or Australia, or Canada, or the United States, these are the people, very much like the Russian elites in the time of Lenin, who look down on Malaysia, look upon fellow Malaysians with disgust. And when they compare it to the pomp and splendor of European countries, well, and they see in comparison how underdeveloped it seems, well, they feel a deep-seated sense of shame in being Malaysian. Not just because of our corruption, which, by the way, is perpetrated by the successors of the colonizers. The ruling class of Malaysia are fundamentally the colonial surrogates, but also these liberals feel deeply ashamed to even call themselves Malaysian. And so rather than trying to uplift the status of Malaysia, a global south country, to make it as clean, efficient, and organized as a global north country, they decide they will just abandon Malaysia and never come back. This is the mentality of the elite white-collar Malaysian intelligentsia, especially those who've had the opportunity to visit and study in global north countries. Now, do I feel more relaxed in London? Yes, of course. Do I feel more comfortable in a global north country? Certainly. But at the very same time, I'm not going to point to the flaws of the global south country in question, the country being Malaysia, and say that these are flaws which are inherent to global south countries. Because while the global north truly enjoys, well, as I've said, the pomp and splendor that the global south does not enjoy, and a state of development that is much higher than the global south, this is largely due to the fact that the global south was not allowed to develop. The global north developed at the expense of the global south. The global north got all of these beautiful buildings, these masterpieces of architecture, thanks to putting their boot heel on the global south. Now, am I blaming individual people in the global north? No, I'm certainly not. But what I am saying is that far too many liberals, in Malaysia at least, make very unfair comparisons between global north and global south countries. And rather than seeing them as simply nations at different stages of development, and seeing one of them having been artificially stifled through colonialism, through imperialism, they see the development of a global north country and they think, well, the global north simply has better values than the global south. Nothing could be further from the truth. Just as a man is only as good as the material conditions that surround him, the same goes for countries. You cannot expect the same standard of behavior in developing countries and developed countries. For example, people in Europe can afford to be more civilized than people in the global south. In a country like Malaysia, in a place like KL, for example. That's because people in the global north fundamentally enjoy a higher standard of living than people in the global south. When your material conditions are met, you can relax and you can be more civilized. But if you're struggling to put food on the table, if you don't know when your next meal is coming, you're far less inclined to be civilized. It's the same with any animal, really. A hungry wolf is a lot more aggressive than a wolf that's full and content. And that goes for countries as well. Of course, that's not to say that there aren't individual people in the global north who are struggling to put food on the table. That's not what I'm saying. But collectively, if we compare the standard of living in the global north and we compare it to the global south, it would be, the best analogy for this would be to compare someone who was brought up in a middle-class family with someone who was brought up in the ghetto. Now, if the person who was brought up in a middle-class family were to get into drugs and gangster rap culture, you would be quite surprised. And it would be far less understandable than if someone who was brought up in the ghetto were to fall into such proclivities. That's the analogy that I'm going to use when comparing the global north with the global south. Simply put, the global north can afford to have a higher standard of behavior simply because its material conditions are far more satisfied than the global south. Now, Malaysia may not exactly be at the same stage of development or refinement, not even close to a city in Europe. But we will get there because no two men's material conditions stay exactly the same throughout their lifetime. A person can go from rags to riches and then from riches to rags. These things are never static if you watched any of my previous videos. The same applies for countries. A country's material conditions or a nation's material conditions are not static. And the state of development or the stage of intellectual and physical development of a country is all reflective in that country's material conditions. Now, it might be hard to believe, but London wasn't always known to be a very refined sort of city. Now it has that reputation, but certainly not in the Dark Ages. In the Dark Ages, it was quite literally a shithole. I don't say this to insult London. I like London. But it was that the streets were quite literally paved with shit in the Dark Ages. But that was because back then, the material conditions were bad. But today, the material conditions are not the same as the material conditions in the Dark Ages. So you see where I'm getting at. Material conditions define a country's stage of development, and its culture is also defined by its material conditions. So spare me all the bullshit about how Malaysia can never become a great country, or Malaysia will always be a shithole, and it will never reach the prestige of any European country, or Japan, or South Korea. Because the state Malaysia is in is due to its tragic colonial history. It is like a man who's been constantly stamped down upon, right? Exploited by another man. And you compare this man's material conditions with the material conditions of the man who is exploiting him. Who do you think lives a far better life? Well, of course, the man who's exploiting him. And whose children do you think live a far better life? Yes, of course, the exploiter's children. So, fundamentally, it is not fair to put the blame on non-Western values when it concerns the lack of development in certain global South countries. The blame, really, should be placed on the fact that these countries were not allowed to organically develop. These countries were constantly stifled. They constantly had their resources and riches robbed. And if you're wondering how Europe can look so beautiful in its current stage, you know why. You have to ask yourself whose expense this could be created at. Because it's very difficult to develop your civilization and to develop your culture when your productive forces are always getting stifled and your resources are always getting drained, leached by another country. And it's very frustrating that I see so many doomers, so many Malaysian doomers, who always compare Malaysia to global north countries, developed global north countries, when the fact of the matter is that Malaysia is not even a poor country. It is an excessively exploited country. Colonizers do not come to poor countries in order to make money. No, the global south is rich. The global south is rich in resources. But the fact of the matter is the people are poor. This is my hotel room. Now, while you can say it's decent enough, it's not what you would expect in a 3-star hotel in Malaysia. Right? Let's take a look at how tiny the toilet is. Absolutely tiny. And this is supposed to be a 3-star hotel. So, in a 3-star hotel in Malaysia, you get a room that is twice this size and a bathroom that's thrice this size. So, there are many, many ways that Malaysia is actually outperforming the UK. And this is just one, besides the fact that it's very hard to find public hand washing sinks in food courts or at burger joints when you want to wash your fingers. You get far more bang for your buck at a 3-star hotel in Malaysia than you do at a 3-star hotel in London. But at the end of the day, you will always be Malaysian. Now, even if you move to a Western country, change your identity, and never want to associate with Malaysia again, you'll always be Malaysian. You'll never be able to shed that aspect of identity off you. It's like if you have a mother who's poor and struggling and who's an alcoholic because she's being crushed by the boot heel of capital. You cannot disassociate yourself from your mother, even though you might be embarrassed by her. In the end of the day, you'll always be known as the son or daughter of Madam so-and-so. And so, I think it's pointless for Malaysians to constantly wax lyrical about how Malaysia can never develop like a Western country, or Malaysia is simply a lousy country and will never get to the level of awesomeness as a Western country. Because it can't. Just like I mentioned, London was never known as the refined hub of the world, the hub of refinement. Only in the modern era did it develop its productive forces and develop its culture to this state. But at whose expense, I ask? So, who's to say we cannot create an organic, material, and thriving civilization as well on our own? I say we go for it. And I say that the naysayers, those who hate Malaysia, those who despise the country and feel ashamed to be Malaysian, and I'll tell anybody I meet overseas, I tell them very proudly I'm Malaysian. Anybody who's ashamed of being Malaysian should have their passport revoked, and they should never ever come back. Because if you were not with us at our worst, don't expect us to take you back at our best. So to wrap up this video, as much as I like the UK, as much as I like Adelaide, where I studied, which is very similar to London, I'm not going to abandon Malaysia, even if given the opportunity. Even if someone offered me the opportunity to move to a Western country and have a stable rice bowl that would never break, I would not take it. Because I am a Malaysian. That is my home. That is my motherland. And just like you don't choose your parents, I did not choose to be born Malaysian. But what I do know is that it has every bit of potential to develop into a country as developed as any European country. Because I believe in the Malaysian people. And I believe we can. If London could develop from a shithole into what we see now, why can't Malaysia? Thank you. Have a nice day.